Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. Thank you very much for joining us today. And please allow me to welcome all the members of the media and a few USCBC members as well. I'm sorry that we can't be together today to discuss the survey in person. I so much enjoy the give and take and the jousting and the Q&A time, and look forward to doing that virtually in a few minutes. But hopefully next year we'll be able to see each other in person. This event is being recorded for those who couldn't make it, and everything that is said is on the record. So you should have received an embargoed copy of the survey document. It is available in English and in Chinese, and the embargo is lifted at the conclusion of this press conference. The survey will be posted on the USCBC website later this afternoon. So the format for today is that I will speak for about 20 minutes, presenting major findings, and then drilling down a bit on the answers to some of the survey questions. Then we'll open up for questions from the media, and I'll be joined by two colleagues, Anna Ashton and Jack Kamensky. As always, we're available almost any time for one-on-one media interviews on this or other topics related to US-China relations by phone or by remote video. Our communications director, Doug Barry, would be glad to assist you to get what you need on this or any other topic involving the US-China relationship. So let's dive in to the USCBC member survey for 2021. So by way of introduction, the US-China Business Council has more than 250 corporate members. Many of these companies are Fortune 500 firms, and most of them have significant investments in China. Despite a presidential transition and the beginnings of an economic recovery in the United States and in China, tensions in the bilateral relationship have only intensified since our last survey. Over the last year, both countries have enacted policies in the financial, trade, investment, and technology spheres that run the risk of alienating the other in its market. Uncertainty about the future of the US-China relationship is impacting global companies' strategies and investment plans. In addition, travel restrictions on both sides have only served to exacerbate political tensions and operational challenges of companies going both ways across the Pacific. With the availability of effective vaccines, it's certainly time to scrap unnecessary visa restrictions and long quarantines. And while the Phase 1 trade deal was a positive step, implementation has been mixed, and its targets for Chinese purchases of American goods come to an end in less than half a year, and steep tariffs remain in place on both sides. So it is time for both countries to get back to the table. Neither government should take for granted the economic relationship and the stabilizing role that business plays in US-China relations. So let me spend a couple minutes on the key takeaways from this survey. Thank you, Ian. Our annual member survey seeks to take stock of the current business environment in China, unpack the most significant challenges faced by US companies operating there and explore the factors shaping business decisions. Please allow me to introduce 4 key takeaways. First, the US-China tensions remain a top concern for American companies. In 2021, US-China relations ranked as the #1 challenge for US companies doing business in China for the 4th year in a row. Conflicting pressures from both the United States and China threaten to put companies into an irreconcilable position, increasing uncertainty and geopolitical risk. Nearly half of all respondents cite concerns about Chinese customers perceiving them as unreliable because of US-China tensions. And we'll drill down into that in a couple of minutes. The second key takeaway is an uneven playing field makes it increasingly difficult for US companies to compete in the China market. State support for Chinese companies and regulatory barriers disproportionately affecting foreign business continue to skew the playing field in the Chinese market. This is particularly true as China becomes a more mature market and competition intensifies. Long-standing challenges related to industrial policy, data and cybersecurity policy, intellectual property, and standards are exacerbated by the political tensions. The third key takeaway is that the Chinese market remains important for our members and for American companies. Despite challenges, American companies are doing well in China. 95% of companies surveyed remain profitable, and 43% have plans to increase resource commitments in China over time. The vast majority of respondents invest in China to serve the Chinese market where they see strong growth prospects. And again, we'll drill down into this in a few minutes. The #4 takeaway is that American companies are feeling moderated optimism, and that raises questions about their future in China. Despite strong performance in the China market, geopolitical and policy challenges are dampening optimism about China's business environment, and US companies are now prioritizing China less than in previous years. While most companies are not moving their businesses or supply chains out of China, these challenges raise questions about their future competitiveness in the Chinese market. With that said, I'd like to walk you through our survey's main findings in more detail. And it's really in the detail that this gets interesting. But before doing that, let me just spend a couple minutes on respondent profile so that you have an idea what's the quality of this data? How reliable is it? And what do these findings represent? So this year's survey was conducted in June of 2021 and draws from a pool of 107 member companies, nearly half of the USCBC membership. The majority of our respondents have operated in China for over 20 years, and respondents were fairly evenly split between manufacturing, which was 45%, and services, which were 40%, with 22% in primary industries and close to a quarter characterizing their operations as technology intensive. 60% of our survey respondents were based in China, where 34% were based in the United States, while 6% were based elsewhere. So this is 107 companies' views put into an easily digestible format, almost all of them invested in China across a wide range of industries. So I would posit to you, submit to you, that the data here is valuable and worthy of careful considerations. So the first bucket of takeaways that I would like to talk about is related to US-China relations. I would like to talk about a number of different aspects here. And the first would be US-China tensions. Chinese government, the second one would be Chinese government practices, the phase one tariffs, and then some tentative conclusions. So on US-China tensions, every year, we ask our members to rank their top 10 challenges in China. In 2021, US-China diplomatic relations ranked as the top challenge for US companies doing business in China for the fourth year in a row. This speaks to how, even though we've seen a change in administration in the United States, and the beginnings of an economic recovery, many of the underlying drivers of US-China frictions remain unchanged. Other challenges within the top 10, such as tariffs, export controls, and sanctions, are closely correlated with US-China relations. 4 out of 5 survey respondents indicated that they have been impacted by the bilateral tensions. The top reported impact of trade tensions was lost sales in the China market due to customer uncertainty of continued supply affecting nearly half of all companies. While roughly a quarter of our companies have not altered their strategy due to the impact of US-China tensions, many others have adapted their business models. Some of these adaptations include adopting a more localized approach to supply chains, production, services, and intellectual property, while shifting away from certain industry or consumer segments in China. Conflicting pressures from both the United States and China threaten to put companies into an irreconcilable position. 45% of our companies say that they have felt pressure to make statements on political issues, and that the pressure comes from both the US and the Chinese governments, as well as from the general public. Let me talk a little bit about the phase one and tariffs. One of the few breakthroughs in US-China commercial relations in recent years was the phase one trade agreement signed in January 2020. A year and a half into the implementation of the phase one agreement, China has made progress on its commitments, but it has not fully delivered on the promised reforms or purchases. We surveyed our members again this year on their views of the deal and found very mixed views. A plurality of respondents, 45%, have a neutral view of China's implementation of the trade agreement, but a similar proportion, 41%, view it either positively or somewhat positively. Only 14% have a negative view of the agreement. One thing that is without a doubt is that the tariffs remain a significant cause of concern for many of our companies. Most of the US tariffs and Chinese retaliatory tariffs have remained in place following the Phase 1 deal. Bilateral tariffs rank fifth among the challenges faced by companies this year. About half of respondents say it's still too early to determine whether the costs of the tariffs are worth the benefits of Phase 1, while another 41% believe that the tariffs are too costly. The proportion that believe that the costs of the tariffs outweigh the benefits of the trade agreement has increased slightly since the last survey. Now, let me say just a couple of words about this data. I think that you're going to find different responses about the tariffs, depending on whether a company is a manufacturer, a service company, an agricultural company, or an energy company. It has been manufacturers that have, and retailers that have been most affected by the tariffs. Whereas for service companies and energy or many agricultural companies that have received exclusions, the impact of the tariffs has been moderated. And so this data, to a certain extent, obscures where companies are coming from and which sectors they're in. We could talk more about that in the Q&A. Be happy to do that. But I did want to note that different companies have quite different views on the Phase 1 agreement. And it's useful to articulate that there is a diversity of opinion on this subject. So let's talk about travel for 1 second. Travel has affected us all, certainly, but restrictions on travel between the countries rank third among our this year's top challenges. Due to China's strict COVID-19 control measures, it remains extremely difficult to obtain a visa to travel to China, even for critical business matters. Travelers that do manage to obtain a visa are required to endure long quarantines. These restrictions have exacerbated political tensions between the countries due to a lack of dialogue and people-to-people exchange. And they've led to operational challenges for almost all companies, forcing them to cancel events, delay significant business decisions, and even lose business opportunities because business executives were not able to be present. So while the COVID-19 factor is hopefully a temporary factor, it has absolutely been very disruptive in 2020 and 2021 over the last 12-month period. Let me say a few words about the Chinese policy environment. A second bucket of takeaways that I'd like to share is related to the policy environment for US companies doing business in China. First, let's discuss domestic innovation policies or industrial policy. Nearly 3/4 of companies express some level of concern with China's policies promoting domestic innovation and manufacturing, reflecting intensified high-level statements and new policy plans by the Chinese government promoting technology self-sufficiency, which threatens to limit opportunities for foreign companies. This is a very high number, and I think it would be very similar to other countries. It's not only American companies who are concerned with this. But in our case, 39% of companies, a plurality, report that stronger government support for Chinese companies is linked to rising US-China tensions. The share of companies reporting negative impacts of China's push to develop high technology industries and achieve technological self-sufficiency has increased from 12% to 38% over the last 3 years. I think that this graph should be a cause of concern. Among the companies negatively affected, the most commonly cited impacts include Chinese customers shifting away from American products and services, increased competition from Chinese companies, and increased barriers to market access in sectors highlighted in industrial policy plans. So second, let me talk about protectionism and state support. Companies continue to identify a long list of protectionist policies and behaviors that skew the playing field in favor of their Chinese competitors. National policies promoting domestic innovation are at the top of this list for the second year in a row. Long-standing concerns such as subsidies, government procurement access, standard setting, and foreign investment barriers are also playing a role in fostering and protecting Chinese national champions. Competition with Chinese companies is the #2 challenge for survey respondents. Now, much of this is a natural development as China's market and business have matured, but state support for Chinese governments, state support for Chinese companies, such as preferential government financing, licensing, and access to contracts, still raises the question of how much of the competition is fair and how level is the market playing field. Is the market decisive or not? Nearly 3/4 of companies know or suspect that state-owned competitors receive benefits that they do not. The proportion is lower for private Chinese companies, but still comprises the majority of their private competitors at 58%. So this Chinese government support in many forms for Chinese companies at the expense of foreign competitors do create a perception of an unlevel playing field. Let's talk about another difficult problem, increasingly difficult problem, and that is data flows and privacy rules. I'm not going to suggest that this is only a problem in China, but it is a problem in China. Data flows and privacy rules rank 4th among companies' top challenges. Some policies require redundant data storage infrastructure or burdensome and easily politicized security reviews or to transfer data abroad. This has put American companies with global scale at a significant disadvantage without providing clear improvements to cybersecurity. An average of more than 80% of our respondents have expressed concern about Chinese policies and regulations on information flows, privacy, data, and cybersecurity since 2016, when the cybersecurity law was passed. Top concerns include restrictions on cross-border data flows. That's at 58%. Ambiguity of what is required to ensure compliance, and data localization requirements at 54%. Now, I would not pretend that it is only American companies that are being hurt here. All companies are being hurt. Certainly European and Japanese, but I would argue Chinese companies also have a lot of ambiguity about many of the rules at play here. But let's go on and focus on the survey. Let me talk next about intellectual property rights, if I may. Despite a host of regulatory reforms undertaken as China's phase one agreements, half of all respondents say that China's protection of IP rights has remained unchanged since 2020, over the last 12 months. At the same time, perceptions of IP reform or the pace of reform have dampened, with a share of respondents reporting improvements in Chinese protection of IP rights dropping by more than 10 percentage points since last year. Concerns about IP protection are limiting the activities that our respondents are willing to undertake in China, including limiting R&D activities, 24%, companies, products manufactured in China, 18%, and products sold in China, 16%. So this prevents Chinese consumers, researchers, and workers from fully enjoying the benefits of foreign investment and unlocking China's full innovation capacity. Only 5% of respondents have said that they have been asked to transfer technology in the last year. And while technology transfer has not been a widespread concern of respondents in recent years, it could be an acute problem for the specific companies concerned. Generally, this number is roughly in line with historic averages. So it doesn't really indicate a trend that I could see, that we could state with a great deal of confidence. Fifth, let me talk about standards for a second. A very important but somewhat dry subject, but important, particularly in the high-tech and in the industrial space. Technological standards can create opportunities for companies when they align their product specification, but standards also erect barriers to opportunity when they do not. US companies continue to report challenges in their access to Chinese standard setting. Although about a third of respondents have not attempted to participate in standard setting in China, of those that have, 40% rate their ability to participate in standard setting organizations in China as poor. This is up from only 24% over the previous year, and thus this is a cause for concern. Even when US companies are able to participate in Chinese standing setting, they are often still experiencing challenges with processes and transparency. Of the companies that have attempted to participate, 2/3 say that their companies receives slightly below equal or unfavorable treatment. And again, I would note that this lack of ability to robustly participate in China's standard setting organization is a cause for concern, and it inhibits China's technological and innovation ecosystem, and it would be better to allow fulsome, diverse foreign participation in all of these standard setting organizations, absent any clear national security concerns. Let me talk a little bit about company performance and planning. So the final bucket of takeaways I'd like to share today is about how US companies are performing in the China market and how this impacts their future plans. So despite the many challenges, some of which I've hopefully mentioned today, American companies are doing well in China. 95% of companies surveyed remain profitable, and 64% of companies reported revenue growth over the last year. Again, a very difficult year in China, but 95% profitable, 64% reporting revenue growth. Many companies plan to continue investing in China too. 43% of companies have plans to increase resource commitments in China over the next year, and most others are willing to keep their resource commitments steady. An important reason for this is that 94% of respondents invest in China to access or serve the China market. They are investing in China for the China market. These investments are likely to continue because of China's expected market growth. 78% of companies view China's growth prospects as better than other emerging markets. So despite this generally very positive profit picture, sentiment has been dented. Despite strong performance in the China market, increased geopolitical risk from bilateral tensions and, of course, COVID-19's disruption of supply chains and travel have caused companies to rethink China's role in their business strategies. While China remains a priority for companies compared to other markets, among the top 5 for 74% of our respondents, it is considerably lower than in the past. A decade ago, China was a top 5 priority market for 94% of our respondents. Today, only 74%. Still high, but a market decline. Optimism about the 5-year business outlook in China has also moderated over time. While a majority, 69%, remain optimistic, a decade ago, 91% of respondents held an optimistic outlook. The top concern respondents cited as impacting this optimism is the policy and regulatory environment. So companies are not leaving China yet, though 83% did not reduce or stop planned investment over the past year, and 87% of companies have not moved any segment of their supply chain out of China over the last year. However, the trends around optimism and priorities raise questions about the future of US companies in China should market access further deteriorate or alternative supply chains centered in other countries become more feasible. So the trajectory of US-China relations will also play a critical role on how American companies fare in China. Of the 14% of companies that have adjusted their supply chain, the top reason was uncertainty resulting from US-China tensions, probably exacerbated by the tariffs or expedited by the tariffs. So that is an overall summary of our findings in the changes in China for American companies over the last 12 months. I think you will note that there have been considerable changes. So we thank you for listening, and we welcome any questions that you might have on our survey results. And I would welcome you to put your question in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself. Jack and I would be very pleased to respond to any questions. Jack is a superstar here on the analytics. I'm very grateful for him in putting together the presentation, putting together the survey and the mechanics. I also want to thank Anna Ashton, who is also on the line. Anna is the Vice President of our Government Affairs unit, and I suspect that some of you might want to drill in to some of the government affairs related subjects. So I'm grateful to both Jack and Anna for joining us. So with that, let me pause and welcome any of our friends in the media to ask questions. We're on the record, happy to respond on the record to any concerns, any questions that you might have. thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to your questions. This is the fun part, so go ahead.
And to clarify here, there are two ways you can submit questions. You can either type them, type them into the Q&A box, or you can select the little button that says raise hand if you'd like to ask it in person, and I can unmute you and allow you to ask your question then. So just to get kicked off, Dong-Yu has put a question to the question box asking, U.S.-China tensions weigh on American companies. What are your suggestions for both governments to relieve those concerns? Can we expect the Biden administration will conclude its review of trade policy towards China and at least remove some tariffs in the near term, or will decoupling continue and even get worse?
Okay, what a great question. Thank you very much. So let me take a stab at that. We strongly believe, and I think our survey results show, that by and large, American companies support the Phase 1 agreement, and we have made progress over the last 18 months since the Phase 1 agreement has been signed. And I think particular progress has been, the progress hasn't been uniform across the board. There has been progress particularly for American farmers and ranchers, financial services firms, and holders of intellectual property rights. We are hopeful that the two governments will get back to the table, the negotiating table, as soon as possible. We very much hope to see improved market access in China for American companies, addressing some of the concerns that I hope I laid out in a soundly statistical manner today. And on the basis of improved market access improvements, that we can reduce tariffs. The tariffs are a tax on American consumers, on American manufacturers, and to a lesser extent, on Chinese exporters. And therefore, they should be done away with as soon as possible. If the United States and China are going to have a healthy bilateral relationship, we cannot have a high degree of tariffs going both ways across the Pacific. Let us recall that tariffs are high going both directions. Coming into the United States, a weighted average of about 19%. Going into China, a weighted average of about 20%. Those are not exact numbers, but approximately correct. And we cannot have a normal relationship. We cannot have a healthy relationship with those tariffs in place. So we encourage both governments to get back to the table to address the legitimate market access concerns that American and other foreign companies have with a level playing field in China, and get rid of the tariffs as soon as possible, going both ways across the Pacific. So I hope that that responds to your question, and I'm hopeful that we'll see action along those lines in the near term. Thank you very much.
Okay, up next, Mengtong Chen has their hand up, so I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. So if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, could you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Greg, for this conference. I have two questions, if I may. My first question is about the shifting of the top 10 challenges. Compared to last year, COVID impact has dropped to number 9 from number 2. The tariff drops a little bit as well from number 4 to number 5, and the export controls and sections makes a way to the list first time. So what is the message behind these changes?
Well, I think that is a good question. We have to remember that the survey was taken in June, and I think at that point there was a great deal more optimism about COVID, and now there's certainly more uncertainty about that. So this is a slice in time, if you will. And I think that if we were to do the same survey today, we'd see a slightly different balance. I do think that the questions about export controls and sanctions, there is increased concerns. And I think that there are concerns by American companies on the unreliable entities list, on the blocking sanctions that have recently been announced by China, on the cybersecurity law also announced by China. So on both sides, there are sanctions and threat of sanctions that threaten really all market players who wish to do business in an even way. And as I noted there, not all, but virtually all of our companies are wrestling with the requirements on data security and the ability to transfer data securely across borders to do business in a kind of a normal manner. That is becoming more difficult. And of course, as you know, sanctions for any data breaches could be quite high. And so compliance costs for American companies, and I dare say for Chinese companies also, are absolutely rising. And these are costs that ultimately bring down profitability and may lead to increased prices. So the increased political tensions we're definitely paying a cost for that. And it's definitely slowing down the ability of companies in both countries to do business in the other. And the trend lines are interesting over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. And again, you're going to see shifts in what's number one, what's number two, depending on the time frame when the survey was taken. So I hope that that's useful. Jack, Anna, anything else to add? Okay.
Okay, so back to the Q&A box. We have Mara Lee submitted a question asking, where did manufacturers rank tariffs as a concern? I'm not sure if we have that breakdown, but
I'll throw that over to Jack.
Yeah, that's right. That's not, we don't break out different industries among our data because with the number of respondents we have, you know, a bit over 100, it would start to become less statistically significant, and we want to make sure that our conclusions are robust.
But I think that the general point is really important, that tariffs affect people in a very differentiated manner. Not all companies are equal here. Many of our companies are service companies, and they might not have felt the impact of tariffs at all. On the agriculture and the energy side, it has been relatively easier to get exclusions to the tariffs for normal operating prices and procedures to take place. It's really in the manufacturing sector that the tariffs have been felt. We previously released a study, which is on our website by Oxford Economics, detailing the differential impact of tariffs on different industries. And I would refer you to that study, which I think is still statistically very, very sound and still statistically very relevant. Now, the tariffs have been in place for some time also. And so some companies have found workarounds the tariffs. And therefore, I would say that much of the cost has been paid on the tariffs. And so it is only for those companies that have not found alternative sources of supply or not found workarounds that are still suffering. So this is definitely the type of thing where the costs of the tariff were especially high up front. That's not to say that there are not an enormous number of small, medium-sized manufacturers for whom that's really difficult to find the workarounds. And it's really for the small, medium-sized manufacturers that feel the brunt of the tariff burden on their operations. And it's them who have lost market share, not only in China and the United States, but potentially on a global basis, as their competitors don't have to bear that burden. So it is certainly in manufacturing, and I would say mostly small, medium-sized manufacturers who have suffered the most. In addition to that, I think it is agricultural producers who have not been able to get exclusions. And that would include much of horticulture as well as other products as well. Thank you.
All right, next up with hands raised is Ellen Chen. So I've just allowed you to talk, so if you can now unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Mr. Allen. Thank you so much for doing this press conference. I just have one question. So we are seeing over the past few years, U.S.-China relationship has been going more tense, and we are seeing that more tit for tat kind of actions are going on between these two countries. So I was wondering, over these past few years, we are seeing much more actions coming from the White House, coming from even Capitol Hill, trying to target Chinese companies and supply chains over the concern of national security issues. So I was wondering, among your member companies, do you hear them saying or express any concerns about retaliatory actions coming from the Chinese side? And have they talked about any strategies countering it?
Sure. No, thank you very much, Ellen. So, I've been involved in U.S.-China trade for nearly 40 years. And I would say tit for tat is the elemental, the key, the core Chinese strategy. And it has been for a long, long time. So I would agree with your observation that the retaliatory measures taken on national security grounds by the US, but also by China, have led to increased concerns. And recently, say over the past 2 years, the Chinese government the National People's Congress, has passed a good number of regulations that could potentially be used to retaliate against foreign company sanctions, either in China or in more recently Hong Kong. And so it is natural that our companies are concerned about this, and they're concerned that they might be targeted. But I would say that the concern is more, we could kind of bring it up to a higher level. That there's a concern about conflict of laws, that there might be a case that in following a U.S. law, they would therefore be breaking a Chinese law. And if that is the case, then they are put in an impossible position. And I think that the blocking sanctions regulations recently passed by the NPC and extended to Hong Kong are really a cause of concern. And so we urge both governments to use these sanctions very, very carefully, to stick to true national security concerns, to avoid using them for protectionist purposes, and to avoid putting companies in a conflict of law. It is, I think it's useful to remember kind of a general principle. Capital is a coward. Capital will go where capital is welcome. But if capital is not welcome, if investments are not welcome, it's not going to come. Capital is a coward. So companies are concerned and watching carefully for signs of changes in policy on the ground. And we are talking intensively with both governments to remain, to assure ourselves that we remain fully compliant with the relevant laws, rules, and regulations in both countries where we do business. And it cannot be otherwise. And we are hopeful that we will be able to continue to avoid that conflict of law, which is becoming a bigger and bigger concern. Thank you.
Okay, the next hand up I see is from David Lauder. So David, I just allowed you to talk. If you can unmute yourself, you should be able to ask your question.
Hi, David. David?
Looks like he's still muted. So oh,
There you go.
he is.
You can hear me okay now?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things that jumps out is the sort of increased, restrictions that U.S. companies are facing in China, and sort of, I guess, there's domestic innovation policies, there's various protectionist policies that you're citing here. One of the things that seems to be on the rise here is, Chinese customers actively shifting away from American companies, increased competition from Chinese firms that were not previously competitive. Just wondering if you could drill down into that a little bit more. I mean,
Sure.
Is that a result of just the tensions increasing and sort of, nationalistic sort of groundswell there that you're seeing, or is it something more directed you see by the government?
Okay, yeah, great question. Thank you, David. So what we're hearing from our companies is that government procurement is becoming more difficult, and that in cases and anecdotal, our companies are being told, no need for you to bid on this. You're not going to win. And that type of statement is a concern because all under the WTO, all products, be it an imported or a domestic, should be treated equally. We're seeing some similar pressures, not from the government, but from state-owned enterprises, where also they are becoming reluctant to purchase from American suppliers. I think on Chinese private sector companies, they're looking at the entities list and, for example, export control expansion, and asking the American company to be able to guarantee that they will not fall under U.S. export control, future U.S. export control restrictions. And of course, the American company isn't able to do that. And so as a result of that, Chinese suppliers are trying to spec out American software, hardware, parts, components, and other materials, and bring in parts, components, and materials that would not be subject to U.S. export controls. And we see that tendency in a good number of industries, and it is a big concern because China is a significant percentage of the global market and even a larger percentage of global growth. And we want to be able to participate in a fair, equal manner with our European and Japanese competitors. Now, it is also true, and it's really a different story here, a different process, a different mechanism, if you will, that Chinese companies, mostly private sector, are becoming much more competitive in many of these areas. And I think that we really, some of them with obvious government support, sometimes without, That increasing competitiveness, particularly on a cost basis, but also on a quality basis of Chinese competitors is also something that we absolutely see and feel. It is becoming more difficult, more competitive in the Chinese markets. And private sector Chinese competitors can scale up very quickly. They're very fast. They're innovative. Quality can be very good. And so that is a different bucket of concerns. But I think that where we try to highlight is the steps that we are concerned that the government is taking to not allow or to not nurture a level playing field where foreign companies would feel equally welcome, certainly to state-owned enterprises as well as to private Chinese companies. And we're worried that that level playing field is eroding and getting a little bit less level over time. That would be a major concern. And it should be a concern of the Chinese government too, because that creates inefficiencies, it creates waste. Chinese companies are not getting the best technology or the best products around the world. And foreign companies become reluctant to invest if they feel that they're not going to be treated well. Again, capital is a coward. And if the capital doesn't feel like it's going to be treated equally or well, then the capital will go elsewhere. That's something that we are not seeing yet, but that we are looking for. Very few companies have moved their supply chains out of China, but some have. Let's watch that trend. Thank you. I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, there's a couple more in the chat box here. So an anonymous person asks, the Biden administration has put business advisories on Hong Kong and Xinjiang and has noted the risks and considerations while operating there. Will this or has it affected U.S. companies in general? And would you preview a potential outcome on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have absolutely, all of our companies know about the Xinjiang and the Hong Kong advisories. And we note the relatively unusual nature of these press advisories or advisories issued to business through the press, right? We note that there are a number of agencies that have collaborated on these advisories. We note the relatively stark tone in the advisories. We note that they don't have a force of law, but they are indicative, perhaps, of where the administration is going. And we wish to encourage the administration to consult with business, to understand the potential implications of these advisories, and to consider how they may affect overall American competitiveness. So this is a space that we also are watching with a great deal of interest. I can't say that we have a conclusion yet. We are by no means finished with this story. Indeed, we are interested in what will happen next on the regulatory front. And we all need to be prepared for regulatory adjustments as they might come up by either the Chinese or the American governments. Thank you.
Do you have time for one more then? Or?
One more, yep.
All right. There's one hand raised, and that is Maling Xiang. I've just allowed you to talk, so if you can unmute yourself, you can now ask your question directly. Hi,
Maling.
Hi, Craig. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been very informative and interesting discussion. I have a question regarding like a long-term perspective. You have been doing this, like you said, for decades, and you probably have seen ups and downs in this relationship. And I guess everybody would agree that we're currently seems to be in some kind of a low point in the bilateral relationship. From what you have learned from the U.S. business community, do you think they are kind of pessimistic about the future? Do they think that this relationship is going to improve in the short term, or do you think they expect this to go on for a rather long time?
Well, thank you, Mao-Ling. As you note, there has always been tension in the relationship. We could go back to the Qing dynasty and talk about tension with the relationship. I think that your point that there's a significant increase in tension is very valid. And of course, companies are concerned with that. I would look at the real trade numbers and the investment numbers, and it looks like from U.S. customs and Chinese customs and the investment figures, the trade is expanding. Certainly for the first half of 2021, till we speak, trade has done reasonably well. There remains a great deal of interest in expanding investment going both ways. So what I would say is, yes, of course, there are concerns about factors that we cannot control. But at the same time, I think that most companies are pretty used to managing through trouble and finding ways to be compliant with the law, but also able to meet customers' expectations and to expand business going both ways. And so the economics have not fundamentally changed. And business people are very pragmatic, very dogged. They will follow the law, but they will seek opportunities. And so I think that at the end of the day, we will be able to manage all of these issues, and we will continue to do business with each other in a very large, meaningful manner. The question comes is, will we be able to expand the business? Will we be able to grow the business? And then where can we grow and how can we grow? And I wish I had a good answer to that. But maybe next year around this time, we could have another chat about that on the record at this forum when we release our 2022 survey. So thank you very much. Ian, I think if those are all the questions that we should close.
That is pretty much all of them, though I will note that if you have any outstanding questions or you want to reach out to us for interviews, you can contact Doug Barry, who is our Senior Director of Communications. His email is dbarry, B-A-R-R-Y, @uschina.org. And as of now, the survey itself is actually public on our website as well, so you can find that at uschina.org/reports.
Thank you for your interest in the U.S.-China Business Council. Thank you for your interest in U.S.-China trade. We look forward to a continued dialogue with you all. And thank you to John and Anna and to Ian for this press conference. Have a good day. Thank you and bye.